Jim Harbaugh spoke with the media at the NFL's annual coaches meetings, and the biggest revelation to come out of it is that the answer at left guard right now for the Chargers is Trey Pipkins.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there, as always, for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, what we found out from Coach Harbaugh is that the Chargers are going to be playing musical chairs with the offensive line. They're going to move Trey Pipkins apparently over to left guard, and they are going to make Zion Johnson the starter. At least right now, it seems like that is the plan for the Chargers offensive line. We do know what's going to happen on the right side with Mekhi Becton and Joe Alt, but that's about all we know other than Rashawn Slater being at left tackle. So lots of moving parts there, and I think there might be a very good chance that the Chargers may bring back Keenan Allen.
Yeah, it feels as likely now as it ever has. I would definitely go out on a limb and say that. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And David, of course, we weren't really expecting Jim Harbaugh to come out and have a 30-minute press conference, but that's what we got. And it was very illuminating in a lot of ways, specifically regarding the offensive line. And let me preface it with this before I get yelled at. They're probably still going to add more to this position. So this is all just talk about what's happening right now. And when asked about if Zion Johnson won the center position, who would be the left guard, Jim Harbaugh immediately mentioned everyone except for Trey Pipkins. He said James is going to be part of it. He said, he said that Bradley Bozeman was going to be part of it. Maybe Jamari Sawyer was actually the first guy he mentioned. And I believe it was Daniel Popper that was like, well, what does that mean for Trey Pipkins? And then he says, well, that would probably be the number one guy right now. Meaning that with where things stand with the offensive line, the incumbent starter, hypothetically on paper, is Trey Pipkins, which is not something to overreact with on its own. But I think it's just the latest in kind of a chain of events that's left fans wondering how improved this interior offensive line is actually going to be. And this is my thing with Trey Pipkins. It was his first year at guard last year, and he struggled. Part of the reason we went into the offseason with the outrage that we did without immediate moves in the interior was because Pipkins struggled so much at guard. Like, he was one of the problems that you were so... You signed Mekhi Becton because Trey Pipkins wasn't that good at right guard. So yeah. I don't think that Trey Pipkins can't get better at guard in his second season. One thing I think would probably stunt the development again is moving him to another position and having him switch sides to a position that he's actually played 0 NFL snaps at left guard. So I don't think it's something to totally overreact to right now. But I think as far as him saying this and how that would be perceived kind of by the fans at this point before we see another move made, it's like, man, that doesn't seem like a great answer.
It really doesn't. I mean, for Trey Pipkins, he's played at left tackle for the Chargers. He's played at right tackle for the Chargers. He's played at right guard for the Chargers. Now you're going to move him to left tackle or left guard. There's so many different positions that he's played, none of them at an extremely high level. Probably the best position he's played in the NFL is right tackle, but at guard, he looked way out of place. I mean, especially from a pass protection perspective, where he gave up almost 10 sacks last year. Just a really, really bad performance. And yeah, he dealt with injuries, but he's dealt with injuries pretty much his entire career. I personally, as of right now, as of, this day, the 2nd of April, as we're recording this, cannot feel comfortable with the plan right now of Mekhi Becton at right guard, which you feel great about, but then at center, you have no idea. And at left guard, you really have no idea other than it's possibly Trey Pipkins. None of that inspires any kind of confidence going forward as of right now before we hit the draft.
Yeah, and I mean, Trey Pipkins, it was 6 sacks he allowed last year, but the reason he was moved into guard is because he gave up 9 sacks at tackle the year before. Like, yes, it still wasn't great there, and that's part of the problem is that was the answer last year. That's what you bought into last year. That's what we heard last year when we heard the best 5 are going to start. if Trey Pipkins is still in the mix for the best 5, it just doesn't feel like enough has been done, even though there's still time left. And I think another kind of revelation from it, because at least with Trey Pipkins, to me, to your point, I think the best position for him is swing tackle. If you're going to pay him that much, you want him to start for sure. But if he's not a guard, he's not a guard. And if you want to keep him, he's a swing tackle, in my opinion.
I agree.
But Jim Harbaugh also said that the plan at center is still Zion Johnson, which isn't totally shocking, but I think after the signing of Andre James, it at least muddied the waters a little bit. But what he said is, Zion, we're really excited to see him at center and have that versatility too. I just can't wait to get started. That's an exciting piece. I can't wait to have at it and see exactly what transpires there. It's no secret how high they are at Zion Johnson potentially being center. And I understand it in a vacuum. I just think that for me, you have 6 guys on the interior now. If you include Trey Pipkins, you have Zion Johnson, Mekhi Becton, Bradley Bozeman, you have Jamari Sawyer, obviously, and Trey Pipkins and Andre James. I mentioned somebody twice, but either way, it's 6 dudes. Like, how many more guys are you going to add to that position at this point, right?
Yeah.
I think the part with Zion Johnson is we thought kind of, maybe Andre James will play center, but I think you have to take a deep breath to a certain extent and be like, okay, well, Andre James should still get a chance to be the starting center. Where does that put Bradley Bozeman? Who knows? But there will be a competition there. And the coaches, you have to trust them to play the best guy and whoever wins that spot.
At least when you talk about Bradley Bozeman, he has like actual experience at guard and at center.
Sure.
Right. And, the way that they're talking about Andre James potentially getting a tryout at guard instead of him, being the incumbent at center, as he is the best center on the football team based off of his performance in his NFL career. Take last year and throw it out the window. Look at every other year of Andre James's career, and he was, by all accounts, an above average center in the NFL. The Chargers haven't had that since Corey Linsley retired. No offense to the people who have played that center position after him, but that's just the facts. So saying right now that you don't want to give the best center on your team every opportunity to prove that he's the best center and be that guy until he is unseated doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I understand that they want to have all of the, confidence and inspiration behind Zion Johnson's potential move, and they want to have, the confidence that he can make that move, but he hasn't been a great guard, and he was a first-round pick at the guard position. So we're talking about 4 years into his NFL career, switching to another position and expecting him to be above average at that position, I think is just a bit far-fetched to me.
I totally understand it. I mean, going back to the Zion just at center specifically and their faith in him there, like, I don't think that's crazy, but I do think that assuming that he's just going to take this giant leap, when I think you would say maybe his biggest weakness was just being able to kind of identify stunts and just missing out on blocks and letting free rushers get past him. That was the biggest problem. That is a huge part of being a center, is those kind of checks, being able to identify those things. And by all accounts, he's a smart dude, but football smart and, school smart, book smart aren't the same thing. And we haven't necessarily seen that consistency at the NFL level for him. So I think that the biggest part it comes down to is just this. You're talking about playing Andre James at left guard, who has 0 career snaps there. You're talking about his potential, the guy he's trying to beat out at left guard, Trey Pipkins, also having 0 snaps at that position. And then playing Zion Johnson at center, who has 0 snaps at that position. I love versatility. Versatility is great.
Yeah.
The depth on the line, I think, is great. The problem is you need more top-end talent starting for you, and you need better production from your starters than you got last season. Is Andre James, what is Andre James' time better spent doing? Trying to win the starting center job for the Chargers this year in 2025 because you signed him as a career center? Or trying to beat out Trey Pipkins at left guard? To me, that's pretty simple. He should be pretty, to the point where I would rather have Zion Johnson just be what he was at left guard and get an upgrade at center with Andre James and feel like I've upgraded 2 out of those 3 spots.
And you
As
did.
it stands right now, I feel like you upgraded 1 spot with Mekhi Becton, and you have 2 huge, gigantic question marks still at center, at left guard, if your plan is to just not have Andre James be your starting center. And he never specifically said Zion Johnson was the center, right? He never said he was the starting center. He never said that Trey Pipkins was the starting guard. He said that if Zion Johnson is the starting center, Trey Pipkins is probably the starting left guard right now. So a lot still has to be shaken out, but there's one thing that you have to feel good about, and that is Mekhi Becton. He is our savior. And Jim Harbaugh, maybe unsurprisingly, was just stunned by the sheer size of him and loves that part of its game. But I also thought the flirting with Keenan Allen now has reached a smoke territory where it has to be talked about, because in Jim Harbaugh's words, anything is possible. And we're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center, and you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money, and you start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, I started realizing how much I was spending on certain stuff, especially like dining out, how much I was spending on food in general, how much baby formula is costing me every month. But that's the great thing, is like being able to set those goals for myself because of Monarch Money to try to beat them the next month. I've done it 2 months in a row, which is super impressive since my kid's first birthday party is this weekend. But every day I feel like I'm learning something new about Monarch Money. But I think just the all-in-one convenience and just total simplicity of being able to share it with my wife and keep track of all of our finances is so great. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, David, well, it's time to get into what more Jim Harbaugh had to say at the NFL coaches meetings. And I thought one of the funniest things was hearing him talk about Mekhi Becton, because you can hear just how excited he is about Mekhi Becton, and specifically the size. You know, he talked about his play, you know, he's really good, all this stuff. But then you kind of just see him staring off into the distance. Like, then I think about him standing next to 6'8" Joe Alt, and I think about just the total mountain of meat that I have on the right side. He didn't say that, but that's what his eyes said. So it was very unsurprising to hear about just this team getting a little closer to Jim Harbaugh football by just getting the biggest dude and the strongest dude and the dude with the longest arms to try to put on that right side to help fix this running game.
Makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that's exactly what I was asking for. I mean, I wanted top of the market type of guard help there, but that did not help. But they did get somebody who is a clear and obvious upgrade at that right guard position. And the way that he was able to just open up cavernous holes for Saquon Barkley was really, really exciting, because him and Joe Alt on that side can do some absolute real damage and open up some big holes for Najee Harris and give Justin Herbert the running game that was promised to him when Greg Roman entered the building.
Yeah, it's what, you know, basically every Jim Harbaugh team has been equipped with. It's what every Greg Roman team has been equipped with. A great running game to rely on, and in 2024, they didn't have that. When they needed it, it wasn't there. So I think that it is a step in the right direction, but it was also really interesting to hear just Jim Harbaugh talk about what really impressed him the most being the pass blocking. This is what he said. The more I watched him, the pass protection is maybe the best quality, the best part of his game. The run blocking is, you know, elite. Pass blocking as well, elite. It's just hard to get around him, which is physically,
that's true.
Literally very true.
Yes.
But I think he has a good point. And I think what his point there is everyone gets caught up with the running game. And when they see this addition, they say, okay, well, at least the Chargers running game is going to get a lot better. And I could see how in Jim Harbaugh's eyes watching the Chargers interior last year, it'd be very easy to say, listen, I know you guys seen this run blocking. By God, I can tell you at least the last year, I haven't seen any pass blocking like this on the interior when he watched Mekhi Becton. So that part isn't very surprising at all. No. But I think that it is kind of a point by him to say, look, yes, he is going to help us. Yes, the attractiveness of him is the size and his ability to open up holes in the running game, but don't sleep on his pass protection. And even though you're getting a worse coaching staff with the Chargers, at least as far as the offensive line goes, and I can only say that so definitively because the Eagles easily have the best offensive line coach in the NFL, so it's not a slight to who the Chargers have, but they weren't able to get the most out of that unit or at least improve that unit enough last year. But going into year two, you could, especially sticking at right guard, which Jim Harbaugh also confirmed, it's easy to see, hey, that's a part where it feels like he could probably get better too. Just having that kind of muscle memory, having the snaps under his belt at the right guard specific position. But Keenan Allen, that's where you have to go next, because he kind of at the end of his press conference, if you watch it on YouTube, you could see that, you hear that someone asked about the potential of bringing back Keenan Allen. And what Jim Harbaugh said back to that is, oh yeah, anything's possible. That would be cool. Well, I think that, that's going to only stoke the fire that is already burning in this Chargers fan base to see one of the fan favorites come back to finish his career where he should have always finished his career, right? Which is with the Chargers. But David, I think that even though it's not like a signing is imminent, just a little bit more smoke to the fire that seems to be burning a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that he even said, hey, that would be cool is something, right? That's him at least acknowledging that is a possibility. And, I think everybody around knows that the Chargers need to add more weapons no matter really what they are. I mean, you look at Keenan Allen and you know what his game is, right? He makes his hay with his route running ability, his ability to, find the soft spots in the zone and being able to make the incredible catches. He's been very, very reliable with his hands, and it's no secret that he has just an incredible connection with Justin Herbert, which we all know is something that they have made a lot of magic together.
My point, and the thing is, too, is obviously Mike Williams, last week poured some gasoline onto the fire as well, posting a picture with Keenan Allen on the golf course and saying, "Run it back, Turbo," which, as Chris Rim rightfully pointed out, is a rap lyric. But when you say run it back is run it back.
Yeah.
In whatever setting you're talking about.
There's no other way to explain that.
There's no, they're two friends, very, very good friends. When you say run it back, paired with the comments we've already heard from Mike Williams, it's very clear what's happening, right? It's a partition. They're trying to get him on the team in one way or another. And he said as much. He said he'd love to have him back. He's campaigning for sure, but they're not shutting the door on it. And I think the main thing is you need to add talent. It might not be the perfect offseason as far as, getting that receiver room to where you need it to be, but you'd be better in certain situations with Keenan Allen, especially on third down, because we know the connection. And we know now you have two dudes who are super reliable on third down that you can go to, not including Mike Williams, who's had his fair share as well. I think the biggest thing is part one. End of story, period, point blank, whatever you want to say. It can't take away from Ladd McConkey's targets. If you have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen back, it can't change how big of a part of your offense that Ladd McConkey is. At this point in their career, out of those three guys, Ladd McConkey's easily the best player. Keenan Allen has fallen off a little bit. It's not just about a bad offense in Chicago. It's about the separation rate and how often he's actually creating it and getting open. Those things took a dip last year, and it wasn't helped at all by the bad offense that he's in.
No.
Ladd is wide receiver one. Period. End of story. If you can find a way to make it work, which some people could, then it makes sense. It's just, can Greg Roman do that? Can he figure it out? Because there's also kind of the lack of speed you get with both Keenan and Mike on the field at the same time, because even as a 4-3-9 guy, that's not really what Ladd's game is. Are they both going to be good with playing second and third fiddle, potentially? And then it's about, where does Quentin Johnston add up into this? But it was cool hearing Jim Harbaugh talk about, how excited that Justin Herbert was to get Mike Williams back. I think you'd be pretty excited to get Keenan Allen back as well, David. And it feels like as much as you think it's not going to happen, it just kind of keeps coming back a little bit. But I do think it was also cool, and you brought this up as something you wanted to talk about too, the Tyler Conklin connection. Because, of course, David, when there's a signing, if you look back into the deepest crevices of information in the dark web, you will find a connection to that player in Jim Harbaugh. And, of course, with Tyler Conklin, that also exists.
It did, and it's kind of interesting how that came about. So, Michigan head coach Sherrone Moore, who obviously was the offensive coordinator for Jim Harbaugh there for a very, very long time, was the head coach at Central Michigan or was a coach at Central Michigan, and basically was like, hey, you should, they originally had him play wide receiver, then went to outside linebacker, and Sherrone Moore was like, hey, why don't you switch to tight end? You got some good hands. Seems like, you have the type of makeup for the position, and look at what happened. He turned that, the opportunity right there into a very, very fine NFL career, and a guy who has had some really solid production over, 6-7 seasons in the league.
Yeah, and Daniel Popper and the Athletic staff outlined this really great in their last article he put out about Jim Harbaugh's press conference, because they talked about that connection, because Tyler Conklin is a guy who was playing college basketball in Division II and ended up transferring to Central Michigan to play football, but didn't have a spot. They wanted to put him at defensive end. Sherrone Moore sees him, who's now, who was the heir apparent to Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, who now runs that team, said, hey, I think I could use that guy, and saw the talent there. But when Jim Harbaugh talked about it specifically, he said, he's always kind of been the underdog. He always acquits himself well, improves himself. That's from Daniel Popper. don't count out Tyler Conklin because he's always found a way. That's the message here. And, it just also, of course, if they're signing someone, it's going to have some tie to Jim Harbaugh knowing him in college or wanting to recruit him in college or whatever. But he also did kind of pour some water onto the Colston Loveland flame when he said, basically, hey, there's 256 picks. There's a better chance that he's going to be playing against us than playing for us. But that's exactly what I would say if I really wanted Colston Loveland on my team. But it was also interesting hearing his thoughts on the defensive line, which he was really high on, but I think we'd both agree that's still a room that needs another guy. So we're going to talk about that, and also maybe that not enough people are talking about the Chargers bringing in a dude who had more interceptions than anyone on their team last year and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before because the Final Four is right around the corner, and it's 4 number 1 seeds, and we've been waiting for the madness. We've been waiting for the crazy games, and it feels like it's all been ramping up to this moment. You're going to want to be betting on FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $200 or get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eyes on a few underdogs in the Final Four for sure, but it's hard not to like Duke to win it all, and right now you can get them at plus 105. But I think there's other good bets there, like Florida at plus 270 feels a little bit juicier. And if one of those teams can pull off, an upset of Duke, you could get better odds there. But with tournament games now happening for the last couple of days, get in on the action now and visit FanDuel.com to get into the action all tournament long. All right, David, well, let's get into a couple more points that Jim Harbaugh brought up at the NFL owners or NFL coaches meetings when he was talking with the media, especially regarding this defensive line, which lost Poona Ford and added a couple more pieces. And Jim Harbaugh had very, very good things to say about those pieces. But thank you, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the guys at Locked On NFL Draft, where they're going every day right now, leading you up to the draft and getting you all the necessary information with Damian Parson, who's going to be on the show next week, and also Keith Sanchez on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, the Chargers added 2 defensive linemen in free agency. They re-signed Tahir Tart, of course, as well. But they lost Poona Ford, and they also lost Morgan Fox, who were 2 of their better pass rushers that they had over the last couple of years. And Poona Ford obviously was awesome last year. But when talking about the new guys, Jim Harbaugh did have some really good things to say and very high praise for the new guys that'll be trying to fill those shoes.
Yeah, I mean, he really did, and this is what he had to say. The first thing that's hitting me is I really like the tape, their ability, their talent. The thing that struck me about both Deshawn and Naquan is their enthusiasm. The first conversations, the second conversations, the third, their love of the game and their enthusiasm to be a Charger. As we say, competitors welcome. So very high praise from Jim Harbaugh for a couple of players that are going to factor in on that rotation on the defensive line for sure. But don't know right now how much of an impact those players are going to be able to make.
And the nice thing is with the defensive line and the defensive line coaching staff, specifically Mike Elston, you feel like both those guys could be, or at least one of the two could be in for a career year.
Yeah.
Gets another year of development with Tahir Tart as well. And I do think the nice thing about both of these guys is, in Daquan Jones's case, I mean, maybe coming off of his best season.
Yeah.
And Deshaun Hand, even though, one of his better seasons was 2023, he wasn't a bad player last year. It's not 2 guys. We're in the case of, Benjamin St. Juste, for example, not to just, for him to catch a stray, but you're hoping to turn around what statistically was one of the worst corners in the league last year. That's not the case with Daquan Jones and Deshaun Hand. These guys were both playing at a pretty high level already. Yeah. You're just not, it's just not easy to replace one guy like Poona Ford with 2 average guys. It doesn't always work like that. It's not always a good 2-for-1 swap. You're not going to get, you might get those 30 pressures that you miss from Poona Ford out of the both of those guys combined, but it's not a swap that necessarily kind of equals itself on a football field. It just doesn't always work that way. And I think when you're talking about losing a guy like Poona Ford, and Jim Harbaugh said had a great season, was a great teammate, just there every day, that leaves a bruise. And you could tell it hurt him. They needed him back. They wanted him back, and they didn't get him back. I think what you're left with, David, is feeling like, okay, Daquan Jones, Deshaun Hand, those as complementary pieces can be really good pieces, but you don't have your Poona Ford. That's a room that feels like it still needs a guy.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that room and you see, okay, they have the quantity of guys, but do they have the quality of guys? I think that's one of the things in your mind. It's like, where's
The
the
depth is
top
great.
end, right?
Yeah.
The depth is great. They have plenty of guys that you feel like they're going to have a solid rotation, but there is no building block player on the interior of your defensive line as it stands right now. There just isn't. And it's blatantly obvious that they need to go find that guy. Fortunately, we're about to step into one of the deepest defensive line drafts in a very, very long time. So there should be plenty of options.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because Jim Harbaugh did say when talking about this loaded defensive line class, it's funny how he thinks about it because in Jim Harbaugh's mind, this is how it came out. There was twice as many defensive tackles at the combine this year. It's a great class for defensive tackles. And to his kind of point, I mean, it's true. Like if there's a ton of good defensive tackles coming out, there's going to be a ton of defensive tackles that are invited to the combine. But it does feel like at least part of the approach to the offseason for the Chargers was approaching that specific room on the defensive line, knowing that you have a very talented defensive line class coming to where, hey, we want you back. Here's the number we're willing to go to. But if we can't get you at that number, we know there's a great class where we like a lot of guys in the draft coming up. So it feels like that part of it is very intentional, right? And I think that when you're looking at this defensive line room, especially with the current makeup of it, it just looks like it's like, hey, all of these moves would feel a lot better if you had a number one guy in that room. Like if Teair Tart and Deshawn Hand and Naquan Jones are your defensive linemen, your second, third, and fourth best defensive linemen, you can work with that, right?
Yeah.
And I think as always, the big wild card here is Justin Eboigbe. Yeah, and you'd like to think, hey, Mike Elston can work with that guy. But I think the hard thing with him is he was kind of always a tweener. He was always kind of a tweener between an edge and a defensive tackle.
He did not see the field at all last year.
And he was unusable for them last year is basically what it came down to. Yeah. And they told you that because they didn't use him, right? And that's kind of what it was. So I know, inside the building, supposedly they're still high on him. But it's hard when you're looking at it from the outside looking in, when you're talking about how do they replace Poona Ford? How does that unit become a strength for you in 2025? That Justin Eboigbe's a big part of that solution. So I think that's what it is right now. But I do think the nice thing, like, if you feel like you can find that guy in the draft class, in a loaded draft class in rounds 2 or 3, go for it. You do that there. But if you don't feel like you have an impact player on day 1 later on in the draft, that becomes an option at 22. And if you want to know who they could take, we just did a whole show about that on Mock Draft Monday. But getting that interior pass rush, the Chargers in pass rush as a whole wasn't as good as I think maybe it was perceived. I think they were 22nd in pass rush run rate. They had to get better there. And part of where you get better there and part of where they've lacked is on the interior and finding those guys. When you can get guys that can rush the passer, it does so much for you, especially on the back end, which is so impressive that the Chargers corners and secondary did what they did, considering they didn't have an above average by their metrics pass rush in the NFL last year. If you can get a rush, now all of a sudden, David, in this backfield, you have a guy named Donte Jackson that had 5 interceptions last year. And I think that that's maybe something not enough people are talking about.
No, they're not. But
Jim Harbaugh
one person who definitely was and acknowledged as much was Coach Harbaugh. He said he's one of those corners. He gets after the ball. He touches the ball. He turns the ball over. He's very aggressive going for the ball. And as a quarterback, when you know you're going to go against someone like that who's going to put a little bit of doubt in your mind, like, should I go to that side or not? He's a ball hawk, and I love having that in our secondary. And all of a sudden, Dan, you look up and you look in that secondary, and you have Tarheeb Still with 4 interceptions. You have Elijah Molden with 3 interceptions. You have Donte Jackson with 5 interceptions. Now you have several guys in your secondary that have a track record of taking the football away, and we know those type of turnovers can be game-changing.
Absolutely, they can. And the thing we've talked about before, many times in regards to just football in general, one of the things we've talked about is having closers, having finishers, right? Those are guys who can put a game away. Those are guys that can make a play that, when you have a Patrick Mahomes going down the field or a Josh Allen going down the field, that you have a guy that can make those plays. But the problem is, if you don't have the pass rush, none of those guys are going to eat. And I think in the case of Donte Jackson, the reason he wasn't such a coveted cornerback this year, even though they got him early, but that contract he signed would tell you that he wasn't in the top tier of guys, even with a 5 interception season, is that somehow the advanced metrics still hated his coverage, even with the 5 interceptions. But I think the nice thing there, the silver lining is, me and you have talked about it before, much better in zone coverage. No one plays more zone coverage than Jesse Minter, or at least they didn't last year in 2024. So I think you trust this defensive staff with the defensive line to get the most out of that unit, with the secondary to get the most out of that unit, especially with Steve Clinkscale still back there with that cornerback class and the cornerback room they have right now. So you feel really good about that. And I think that there's a reason the Chargers made this dude a priority. They obviously see something there. They didn't bring back Christian Fulton, who ended up going and signing for more than what Donte Jackson did. This is a guy they feel like can be a player for them in 2025. When you see 5 interceptions and you know Tarheeb still has 4, and you think about that, it's like, yeah, maybe Jesse Minter can do something with a dude who took the football away 5 times last year, which is just a gigantic number for a cornerback. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Today was supposed to be buy or sell, but we got the press conference from Jim Harbaugh. The good news is we have a buy or sell Thursday coming up tomorrow, so make sure you guys hit us up for that to give us your biggest Charger storylines or overreactions, and we'll put a post out at Locked On LAC on Twitter, where we post the show every day as well. We'll put a post out on YouTube so you guys can give us your buy or sell there, or you can call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 and give us your 30-second Chargers buy or sell. We're not allowed to go over 30 seconds with the voicemails. That's a rule for us. And also on Instagram at Locked On Chargers. But thank you, as always, to the everydayers for making us your first listen. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure the notifications are on so you'll be here tomorrow for buy or sell. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.